Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, the MMA Junkie weekly roundtable show. I'm your host, Mike Bond. It is April 24th, coming to you from Toronto. This week, joined by a great panel, as always. We have the Goes and George, MMA Junkie Radio, representing both in Las Vegas here on the panel. And then, of course, Danny Segura, MMA Junkie staff reporter down there in South Florida. It was a busy weekend, guys. So much going on. Boxing, MMA, all sorts of MMA, all the major promotions pretty much except for PFL hosting a big event. So lots to go on and lots to discuss. So let's get right to it, shall we? Topic one for this week. I want to start with UFC Fight Night 222, where Sergei Pavlovich made history in the main event, recording his sixth consecutive first-round knockout, something that's never been done before in modern UFC history, defeating fellow contender Curtis Blaydes in the main event at the UFC Apex. Pavlovich said afterwards that he wants to wait for the winner of Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic, which we expect to happen probably in November in New York. But that could be a long wait for him, guys. He's certainly earned the right to sit out, given what he's done in this division so far. I can't really poke too many holes in this resume, but I guess first off, I want you to give me your takeaways from his performance and maybe give me some early handicaps on a potential fight between Pavlovich and Jones, or maybe Miocic, if that's the way it goes. Danny, open things up for us this week.
Yeah, so it looks like he's okay with waiting, even though that title fight is expected, as you said, towards the end of the year. So it looks like we're going to get hibernating Pavlovich here, because he's going to eat and rest and go somewhere back in Russia and just show up whenever sort of the title picture is resolved here at heavyweight, which may be a very, very long time. But look, this guy is clearly a threat, clearly a dangerous fighter. I said post-fight that he probably is giving right now Ngannou a run for who's got the most power, in the sport, period. I mean, I can't think of somebody else outside of those two of who put the label on who the most powerful striker is in the sport. I mean, what he's been able to do, just knockout after knockout, first round finish after first round finish, is just unbelievable. I mean, the guy is just extremely talented. I do want to see what he looks like in the second, third round, but it looks like we're going to have to wait for that. Clearly, I think the most deserving guy right now to fight for the belt, but I know obviously politics, there's a bigger fight ahead with Stipe Miocic and Jon Jones. Jon Jones won Stipe Miocic specifically, but in my eyes, Sergei Pavlovich is the most dangerous guy in the heavyweight division right now for the champion, Jon Jones.
Yeah, I think you said it perfectly there, right, Danny? Politics, that's what it comes down to. I mean, Stipe Miocic, we know what he's done in the sport, but as we talk about so often on the show, it's not a meritocracy. And if it was, we would be getting a fight involving Sergei Pavlovich next for the title. But before we get too deep into that conversation, I guess, Goes, give me your thoughts on what we saw in the main event at the Apex, and how impressed are you with Pavlovich in this run he's been on? It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, very, very impressed. I mean, he dominated Curtis Blaydes, and we don't see that that often. Him fighting off that takedown from Curtis Blaydes was just amazing. It was like he shot on a oak tree or something. He just bounced right off. Like, he actually got to him. He just didn't move. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And I mean, we see strategy of waiting around for fighters and fights. Doesn't usually work out, but I think in this particular instance, it might be his only play. 6 straight wins in the division, that's no joke. I don't know if you want to risk that. Take time on concentrating on just getting better. A lot of fighters at this high level towards the top, towards a title shot, don't have that luxury. They're usually training for one guy and then training for the next guy and training. He actually has the opportunity to maybe take some time and pick up some new skills, make himself better. But it's really hard to get these type of streaks, man. And for him to do this in the heavyweight division, I think is really, really impressive. And if you're going to handicap a little bit, I hate to pick against Jon Jones, but boy, does this guy show a lot of things that might give Jon Jones some trouble.
Yeah, it's I mean, the power is just terrifying. Like, we have only seen a knockout streak like this once before, and it was Chuck Liddell back in his prime when he had 7 knockouts in a row, but many of them weren't in the first round either. So if Pavlovich, goes out there and his title fight is next, and he knocks the guy out to tie the UFC knockout streak record, and then maybe a title defense to set himself apart, he's got a real opportunity to do something special here. George, just maybe give some context to what you see out of Sergei Pavlovich. Does he stand out as kind of a unique heavyweight from what you've seen compared to all the other terrifying heavyweights over the years?
For sure. This guy is I mean, okay, so he's established that he's a hard hitter, right? And along the way, we wanted to get more questions answered. Well, how would he do against the cream of the crop? And he put away Derek Lewis and Tai Tuivasa, like the others as well. First round. Well, how would he do against the wrestler? That was supposed to be the big test, and he passed. Now, granted, there was the one takedown that did come, and I rewatched the fight, just before the show started. Curtis, he's going to get dumped on because obviously, hey, why didn't you use your wrestling? I would say this. There was a couple times where Curtis landed some nice strikes, and we all said that Curtis Blaydes' striking is probably more formidable than Sergei Pavlovich's grappling, although we've got to really see it. And he hit him a couple times and kind of got a respect back, right? But only for a few seconds. Sergei Pavlovich keeps coming back. That guy's a savage. He wasn't scared of the power. He had tasted some of it. They were clean shots. But it was at that time, I think, that Curtis Blaydes should have followed up with the wrestling. Anytime you bring it up to a wrestler, hey, man, you've fallen in love with your hands, they say, well, I need the strikes to set up my wrestling. He landed the strikes. He had set up opportunities for the wrestling. He resorted to the wrestling once he was already hurt, once Pavlovich didn't respect the hands. And so that was the problem. Like, look, Blaydes is a top 5 guy, and he has been for a long time, so we can't completely dismiss him as just a bum or anything like that. But this was all Pavlovich. We still don't know how he'll do on the ground against John Jones. That's the big question, because he hasn't allowed us the answer, because he's just a Terminator. He ends everything so quickly.
Yeah, I guess the only evidence we really have is the fight with Alistair Overeem in his UFC debut. And we, have heard Pavlovich talk a little bit about that. I know he addressed it on media day, and he basically said that fight didn't have the full camp, traveled over to, I believe that fight was in China, and he didn't have the right time to accumulate or acclimate and stuff. So he said he would never make that mistake again. And the fact that he went 2 weeks early from Florida, where he was training, to Las Vegas shows that he has taken that kind of stuff pretty seriously. So lesson learned, I guess, for him. But I'll stick with you, George. I mean, was Pavlovich impressive enough that maybe the UFC offices, Dana White, Hunter Campbell, Mick Maynard, they go into their matchmaker meeting tomorrow? Do they say, hey, this guy was so impressive, Jones and Miocic don't want to do this until November? Maybe we could call John Jones and see if he wants to fight a bit earlier, and Stipe's available, at any point. Do you think there's any way this forces them to reconsider the calculation of what they're doing with the heavyweight title here?
It at least needs to be brought up. Will a change be made? Well, I don't know. I don't know if a change will be made, but it at least needs to be talked about, because that guy made an impression on fans, on media, on other fighters. Pay attention to your audience. Yes, I know it's all about selling pay-per-views and things like that, and I realize we have GOAT versus GOAT. We don't want to mess that up. But Jesus, these guys, John Jones and Miocic, have been gone away for so long. They haven't been too worried about GOAT versus GOAT or these possibilities for the last 3 years, and now all of a sudden we're supposed to sit around and go, man, I wonder who's the GOAT. We got a hot ticket right here in Sergei Pavlovich. I don't want to wait till November. November means that whoever comes out of that, if they're healthy, remember, these guys don't fight very often. The soonest we could get a fight is February, March, April. We're in April. I'm supposed to get excited about a potential fight a year away? No. I'm sorry. You're not even filling out the August and September dance cards yet. You're on July, 290 set. I get it. But, man, these guys have had quick results in fights. I go with the hot ticket. I get these big guys in there soon, man. Pavlovich versus Jones, and then the winner, he can get, I guess, Stipe Miocic or whatever. But I go with the hot ticket. Dana White said it himself. If you wait around, things happen. Hey, apply the same logic to your matchmaking.
What do you think, Danny? I mean, it's tricky, right? Because if you're Pavlovich, I know he got asked about it. He's like, I don't care who I fight. They're both big tests, but this could be a pretty grim situation. So let's say in this scenario, Stipe Miocic actually beats John Jones. They're doing a rematch of that right away, right? Which puts the timeline even further. And then we also have John Jones saying if he beats Stipe, he might be retiring. He's hinted this could be his final fight. So Sergei Pavlovich, could be a long way out. Maybe if he does fight for a title, it could be a vacant title. God knows who it'd be by that point. It could be very complicated for him. So, if you're in his spot, do you try to make some more noise here, Danny, and be like, no, give me my shot now. I'm not waiting for these two older guys to figure it out? Or what's kind of the play here? Do you think there's any way UFC reconsiders things?
Hashtag hibernating Pavlovich. That's what it's going to come down to. He's going to have to sit back and look how this thing plays out. But this is such a weird situation because, yes, ideally, merit-wise, you can't make a case for Stipe Miocic. The guy hasn't fought in forever. Pavlovich is on a historic run right now. But again, it comes down to politics. I do think Pavlovich is going to have to fight again. Let's be real here. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. I am with George. I agree with his take. Ideally, that's what I'd like to see. But look, we saw the UFC have no problem when the whole Francis Ngannou situation was happening. They had no problem to wait an entire year until, or actually more than a year, until the heavyweight belt was defended once again. So being John Jones in the last of his career, having one or maybe two more fights left, being a huge pay-per-view draw, literally a historic figure, they're just going to roll out the red carpet and really just do whatever he wants. So if they're able to work out something with Stipe by the end of the year, that's what's going to happen. And unfortunately, I think Pavlovich is going to fight again. He can make all the interviews that he wants. He can learn how to speak English. He can do this. He can do that. Look, if a 6-fight first round knockout streak doesn't get you excited, I'm sorry, but an interview, a promo won't. So I think he's just going to have to fight again if we're being real here.
Interesting. Goes, I guess, put a bow on that. If he does have to fight again, who do you think it would be? And I guess if you're in John Jones's shoes and you're looking at Pavlovich come up the ranks here, does this maybe make you even feel warmer about that possible retirement route? Be like, hey, I can come in here, capture the title, beat the heavyweight goat, and then dip, and I don't even have to deal with a man like Sergei Pavlovich, and my legacy isn't going to be affected by not fighting him.
Yeah, that's the thing, is it probably wouldn't be, because just the fact that he went up and did that is such a big deal. I don't know if the UFC want to risk Pavlovich against someone else. But, you know, you mentioned that room with Dana White, Hunter Campbell, the matchmakers. When they're picking up the phone, they're calling Stipe Miocic. He's been notoriously kind of difficult to negotiate with. I don't know that he's as difficult now after seeing that performance, right? Because really, if I'm Pavlovich, one thing I'm throwing out there is look at Stipe's last 8 fights. They've come against guys who have either been either retired or no longer with the UFC, right? Ngannou, Cormier, JDS, Overeem, Verdum. All these new fans that come to the sport are kind of, we're basing this all off of the guy was a great heavyweight champion, but Pavlovich's resume is to date. You're looking at killers that are fighting right now. If you look at Stipe Miocic's record, I think there's only one guy that's still fighting in the UFC, and that's Alistair Overeem, right? I pound that. I pound on the UFC's front door and I say, let me in. I deserve this shot.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, this isn't, I guess, exactly rare. Look at Henry Cejudo, right? He's coming back after a 3-year layoff, and he's getting a title shot too. And John Jones did it himself as well. So this isn't exactly new practice, I guess, from the UFC. And it is the biggest fight in terms of the name value and all that. So I understand why it'll go. But maybe Pavlovich hit the jackpot here. Maybe, guys, he can be the first time, 2-time backup fighter for a heavyweight title fight. That could be his reward. He can step on the scale in November there. George?
If he did hit the jackpot, he'll probably wind up losing it, though. We've already seen what his gambling skills are like.
Exactly. That was great. I'm sure everyone has seen the clip of Sergei Pavlovich gambling at the slots just hours before. That was
how cool is that guy, man? Just chilling, gambling.
He is a nice personality. I'm liking what we're seeing from him so far.
Yeah.
Danny?
How do you even read the UFC, though, at this point? Right? Like, I think, Mike, you had a great point here. He may end up being a backup twice. I mean, that's historic, right? Nobody has ever done that.
I don't believe so.
But so, you know, he was a backup, 6-fight winning streak, 6 first-round knockouts, and that can't get him. Coleman is out for a year, not nearly in that streak. Backup, but because he was backup fighter, he gets the immediate title shot or whatever. So, like, I mean, it's this is such a difficult thing to navigate, right? Like, who gets what? What do you have to do to earn a title shot?
Absolutely. And JD Reality YouTube in the comments says, do you guys think Pavlovich will be the new boogeyman of the heavyweight division now that Francis Ngannou is gone? I think he already is. I mean, he was doing what he's doing. Even Francis Ngannou can put a streak like this together of the first round knockouts. But anyways, to close out this first round topic, or this topic one, I want to address Curtis Blaydes, who was on the other side of the coin here. Interesting situation for him, guys, right? Like, I know a lot of people sitting here Sunday, Monday, being critical of his game plan and all that stuff. Regardless, he lost this fight, and it's now becoming a little bit of a trend. He's lost 3 likely number 1 contender fights at this point. Lost to Francis Ngannou in their rematch, lost to Derek Lewis in a fight where he was knocked out brutally, and then now loses to Sergei Pavlovich in a fight that probably would have got him a title shot. All these having like similar stakes when he was on a winning streak and stuff. Danny, I'm curious, we'll go back to you. Do you think we're now seeing like the trend and the story of what Curtis Blaydes' career might be? The guy who can beat most of the division, but when he's in there fighting number 1, number 2, number 3, he can't get over the hump.
Yeah, I think that's fair. In fact, I already kind of had that feeling going into this fight, which is why my official pick on the MMA Junkie staff picks was Sergei Pavlovich. But if you sort of do a UFC video game type analysis and you just put them by stats, I mean, in my opinion, still to this day, Curtis Blaydes is the most skilled fighter. But there is something weird. I don't know if it's psychological or what, but when he does face a power puncher, he can't really bring out the skills that he brings out against other people. And that's exactly what we saw. I mean, clearly a stud wrestler, but for whatever reason, didn't really attempt to wrestle until he was hurt, which I'm sure is a lot more difficult than being in all your full senses. But yeah, I mean, you look at Curtis Blaydes, how old is he? He's been around for a very, very long time. It just seems he can't get over that. So I think he's going to be a top 5. He's still a very skilled guy. But at this point, after those type of performances, I don't know if he ever will break that sort of ceiling and then become a number 1 or even challenge for a title.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I know that Curtis Blaydes, he wants to be champion, right? He wants to be known as the best heavyweight in the world. And I know, he's had opportunities to leave the UFC. I'd heard, PFL came to him to something pretty strong when he was a brief free agent like years ago, and he probably took less money to stay in the UFC. So I understand why. And, at the very top, there is more money to be made in the UFC if you can get that belt and be headlining pay-per-views and stuff. But he's struggling to get to that point, George. I mean, do you think we have seen the fullness of Curtis Blaydes here? Like, is he not going to be able to beat these absolute top guys, or do you think there's still a path for him to figure this out?
I think there's a path for him to figure it out, because every time he has lost, he's put together a streak of at least 3 fights with some finishes, and he's gotten better. So he's only 32 years old. He doesn't seem to get too down after his losses, although we don't know him personally and how he reacts when he gets back home. We only know that when he comes back, he's tough, he wins, he's still a problem for a lot of fighters. He has to dial something in, though, at this high level, when he's title contender, number 1 contender, whatever you want to call him, he has to definitely, I think, just keep working on fighter IQ, maybe sports psychologist, and game planning. I don't know, because he's just coming up short, but he's not getting devastated to the point where he hasn't been able to answer the bell on the next set of fights that he has. Now, once I start seeing 2 or 3 fight losing streaks and he's getting crushed, then yes, that's when we start to turn the page a little bit. But to be fair, he's bounced back.
Yeah, I appreciate the level-headed response to that, I guess, then, too, because obviously, if you look at some of these fights, he has been winning. He was doing very well against Derek Lewis before he got caught with that insane uppercut. And in this fight, too, he had his moments. And I've heard some people say, I think Dean Thomas put it very well on the post-fight show from this event. Like, he was doing well, but he cracked Pavlovich with, I think, like a right hook. And then at that point, he just got maybe too excited and thought he could do it again and again. And then he ended up getting caught himself, and that was the fight.
Yeah.
But
Mike, I was watching it again, and he had a nice shell. He was respectful of Pavlovich. So he did swing wild a couple of times, but every time that he needed to cover up, he had proper cover up, probably from working with the ring for many years. He started to maybe establish some leg kicks a little bit to the calf. So he was starting to mix it up, but I still feel like, again, your bread and butter is wrestling. He's like the owner of a steakhouse. Give us the steak. You know what I mean? Stop serving the sides and everything else. And he just didn't get to that when I think he should have. And he had already established his hands. And I think once you get that other guy thinking, the striker thinking, conventional grappler versus striker, at some point, that's probably the time where you maybe do want to mix it up. Unless your ego's so strong that you feel like, you know what, I'm just going to beat this guy at his best and take him out. However, you should learn from the last 2 times that you got checked in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky, right? Like, there's such a delicate balance at these heavyweights. You do well on the feet, and then you rush a takedown, you get knocked out like you did against Derek Lewis. And if you, go too aggressive on the takedowns, things can happen. So anyways, we'll see what happens with Curtis Blaydes, how he learns from this one. I consider him one of the smarter fighters out there, despite the criticism around this game plan. So we will see what happens next time out, but we got to move on, guys. Topic number 2 here. Just hours after Pavlovich beat Blaydes on Saturday night, focus shifted to Bellator 295 in Hawaii, the second half of their weekend doubleheader in Honolulu, where Patchy Mix earned the biggest highlight of the weekend, in my opinion, with a knockout of the year contender against Rafael Stotts to win the bantamweight Grand Prix, the interim bantamweight title, and the $1 million paycheck that comes out with winning this tournament. And he now sets up a unification bout against the winner of Sergio Pettis versus featherweight champion Patricio Pitbull, who's coming down looking to become that first 3-division champ in Bellator history. That fight's on June 16th at Bellator 297. But afterwards, guys, after Mix got this incredible knockout, he stated at the post-fight press conference that he is the best bantamweight in the world, something that we are hearing more and more from Bellator champs of late. I think all of us have said on the show at one point or another, guys, that we think the UFC bantamweight division is probably the deepest weight class in the sport, regardless of organization. So for Mix to come out and say this, it's obviously a pretty bold claim when you look across the aisle, especially in the UFC, at what they have to offer. So I guess, we will start this topic with you. Is Patchy Mix right? Is he the best bantamweight in the world? And if not, where do you think he stacks up among the very best, regardless of promotion?
Well, I think it's Patchy Mix's job to say that, to come out and say that, especially after that type of performance. I mean, the dude is surrounded by a lot of talent at Extreme Couture, not just in his division, but close to his division. There's a lot of beasts there. And the current UFC bantamweight champion is one of those guys, right? So he knows how he stands against the creme, the creme de la creme of this division. So I don't know. Going into this fight, we all kind of looked at Patchy Mix as a certain fighter with a certain skill set. He just showed us a new wrinkle, guys, something that was pretty brutal. As Mike said, that knee is going to go down probably as one of the worst finishes that anybody's endured this year. So for Patchy Mix, I mean, is he the best right now? I'd probably say probably not, but he's definitely on his way. What he did was very, very impressive. And the thing about him is he's constantly improving, right? And he's still showing improvement. So I would say let all this play out in Bellator, and then maybe we can revisit this topic. But if you're going to claim you're the best and you're not in the UFC, then you need that resume to kind of back that up. And that's going to take some time.
Yeah, it's still not all the way there. Still got some wins to get and stuff, but he's fought some pretty impressive guys, and that was a hell of a run through this Grand Prix, which I want to get to in a moment. But first, I'll throw it to you, George. Just give me your reflections on what Patchy Mix said and where he thinks he stacks up against these guys.
Yeah, and like Go said, man, when you grab the mic and you're wearing a Grand Prix belt, the interim belt, there's $1 million check behind you. You can say whatever you want, especially when you've gone to a respectable 3 set of fights, like you mentioned, Mike. I believe it was Horiguchi, Magomedov, and Stotts. 2 of them finishes, and a savage knee to end this one. Hell yeah, you can make that claim. Now, at the time, we're all full of adrenaline and beer and pizza and probably fist bumping, saying, "You go, boy," whatever. You fight, say what you want. You start to believe it, but man, that this is a stacked division across the world, 135 pounds. And so I pull up the USA Today Sports and MMA Junkie rankings, and I'm looking at Aljo, who Mix trains with at Extreme Couture. Dvalishvili, you know what he brings to the table. They've also mixed it up there. Sean O'Malley, Peter Yan, Corey Sandhagen, Marlon Vera, Ricky Simone. Like, you got to get to that just to get through to Aljamain Sterling. Maybe not all of them. That's the test. Now, he did pass a stiff test at Bellator, so I allow him to say it. One-on-one versus Sterling, anything's on the table. Anything can possibly happen when great fighters fight. It's whoever's just clicking, but it's being part of the UFC when you have to go through all that. That's when it speaks more volumes and more people are willing to fist bump you or just kind of co-sign on what you're saying. But no, man, historical run for Patchy Mix. This was very impressive.
Well, if they're both there in Las Vegas, Mix and Aljo, why don't you and Goes just go catch them off guard and make them just do a fight here, and we can get the answers to all these questions, guys. Come on, this is easy work.
Yeah,
that's a good idea.
But Danny, I guess your thoughts on Patchy Mix. I mean, we have some people in the comments. Me Diamond 44. You don't think Mix could beat Aljo? Robert saying he could cause problems, presuming he's talking about for the top UFC bantamweights. What do you think? I guess, do you like him saying this, just knowing right now it's not possible? You know, like this is the conversation we keep having, Johnny Eblin, et cetera, Amasov, but we're not going to get answers to these anytime soon. So would you rather not be having this conversation at all?
No, I love it. I think if you believe it, you should say it. You should say you're number one if that's what you truly believe. And certainly all those guys that you've mentioned, I mean, they're champions and they've beaten some respectable names. So there is a case to that. However, unless things in the MMA world vastly change, meaning the UFC stops being the number one promotion in the world, or at least, you know, starts sharing that spot with Bellator, it's going to be hard to claim you're number one if you don't have a UFC belt next to you. And again, this is not me trying to be biased and saying, you know, all the best fighters are only in the UFC. No, clearly there's very, very talented fighters outside of it as well. But UFC is UFC, man. Come on. I mean, it's going to be hard to say that you're the very best in the world if you're not a UFC champion. So again, do I think Patchy Mix is one of the best in the world? Yes. Do I think if he were in the UFC, he'd be a ranked fighter? Absolutely. Top 10 for sure. Top 5? Maybe I have my doubts, but is he capable? Maybe, yeah. And could he give the champion, Aljamain Sterling, some trouble? Yes, of course. He is a world-class fighter. Any world-class fighter could give a champion, a UFC champion, all kinds of trouble. That doesn't mean they'll win, though. But, yeah, I just think the sample size is too small to say definitely that Patchy Mix is the best fighter in the world at 135 pounds. I think for that, honestly, he needs to become UFC champion or somehow have Aljamain Sterling leave the UFC as champion and then almost immediately fight him, almost like the Francis Ngannou situation, and then beat him. Then you can have a pretty decent claim at that. But unless that happens, hard to tell, but certainly one of the world's best for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I think people always, you know, get outraged when we have this conversation and you say something like you did, Danny, which I think you laid it out pretty well. We're not saying that we think they're going to go out there and beat every single guy when it's like a conversation, how would they do in the UFC? We're just saying, could they beat some of these guys? But they would, you know, maybe beat a top 5 guy here or there. Like, look at Michael Chandler, what he's done. Obviously, he came later in the career, but he's beat some guys. He's lost some guys, but he's not going out there and getting washed in every single fight, losing every single round, and embarrassing himself. So I think that's something you need to keep in mind when these conversations come. But to kind of stick with this run from Patchy Mix, some people really praising him for what he did here, right? Like the knockout of Rafael Stotts in the finals, semifinals. He submits Magomedov in the opening round, decisions Kyoji Horiguchi, who I think a lot of people thought had a good chance of winning this whole tournament, and he knocked him out early. So I want to ask you guys, and I'll go with you goes first. Is this the most impressive tournament run we've seen maybe in like the post-Pride era? I know it's hard to compare, like, you know, what Shogun did, fighting 2 guys in one night, like things like that. It was just so different then. So I don't really want to like try to compare eras. But from what we've seen in like PFL, these Bellator Grand Prix, even like the Bjorn Rebney incarnation of the Bellator tournaments, where do you think this run stacks up among the great tournament runs we've seen in the modern era, let's call it?
Yeah, it's right up there. And you know, like you said, with Pride, yeah, it's definitely going to go to Shogun. But I think the one that kind of sticks out for me post Pride era is what Daniel Cormier was able to do with the Strikeforce Grand Prix. But that was more because of where he was placed in the scheme of things, right? Surprising everybody, coming out of nowhere. But if you look at fight per fight, what Patchy Mix did, that is pretty damn impressive, man. And the more and more I think about it, I think it is pretty close, if not up at the top.
George, what do you think? Keep it brief. Do you think this one tops it, or is there someone
This
who's
is
done
it.
it better recently?
No,
Yeah?
this is it. This is pretty impressive. I agree with Goes. Cormier was just throwing Josh Barnett around, but he came in as a sub. He only had 2. This guy had 3 savage finishes. I mean, Rafael Stotts is no joke. He's only got 1 loss. The stakes were high, $1 million. I do want to give a shout out to Rob Wilkinson. He was pretty amazing at PFL last year, just handling his business, all finishes. So, you know, and with striking as well. But, you know, this one to me probably reigns at the top post Pride.
Yes, I agree. I think that's an important handicap. Man, what a knockout there. Just looked unbelievable. And we'll stick on that. Danny, curious, knockout of the year discussion. Is this number 1 so far in your mind, what Patchy Mix did with that beauty knee? We're almost at the 1/3 point of the year here. So I think it's a fair question to ask. What's the KO of the year?
Oh, people are gonna kill me in the comments because the answer is gonna say no. Look, I love Bellator. I think Patchy Mix is great, okay, but I've seen better knockouts. It's a top 5, yes. But for example, the Bonfim knockout against Terry McKinney, oh my god, that was brutal. The way he face planted. Also, even in Bellator, I'll give some love to Bellator as well. Lorenz Larkin spinning elbow against, I forget exactly who he was fighting, but it was a beauty to watch. I do think this is more at a high level. I do think those knockouts that I mentioned came against good fighters. But Rafael Stotts, in my opinion, he's one of the best 15 at very worst. I mean, 17, 20 fighters in the world at bantamweight. That's a lot to say because bantamweight is super stacked. And also, Grand Prix final, interim title on the line. I do think this might be the most high profile in terms of like adding, the mechanics as well as like the moment. Certainly up there. But as far as just pure technique, I'll take the Bonfim one over Terrence McKinney.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, you kind of laid it out well there. There's stakes, there's style, all those things involved. But Bellator is producing some good finishes. I mean, in February, Larkin won our MMA Junkie Knockout of the Month. In March, Michael Page won our MMA Junkie Knockout of the Month. And unless something absolutely ridiculous happens this weekend at UFC Vegas 72, I think Bellator is going to have another Knockout of the Month winner here in April. Just a ridiculous finish. But let's move on, guys, from topic 2 here to topic 3. And since we talked here last week, guys, the UFC dropped a tidal wave of fight announcements on us. Some very, very high profile ones. We'll talk about a number of them throughout the show here, but I want to start with what is the most important in my mind because it is the soonest, and that is the new UFC 288 co-main event between Gilbert Burns and Belal Muhammad, which happens next week, crazy enough, in Newark, New Jersey. The UFC pulled off booking this fight on 16 days notice, guys, for a pay-per-view that, in my opinion, needed it. And it'll be 5 rounds on top of it, with both men claiming that the UFC has promised them that they will indeed be fighting for the title next, probably after Colby Covington gets a shot at Leon Edwards, but they're in a position where they can sit and wait for it, maybe be the backup as well. Who knows? But a huge fight that the UFC put together for the welterweight division. So I want to get first your reactions to this booking. Are you surprised Burns took this fight, given he just fought a few weeks ago, his 3rd fight of 2023 already, and surprised that Belal Muhammad took it? He literally, I think 2 days ago, just finished Ramadan where he was fasting, all that stuff, the challenges that come involved with that. So George, what's your thoughts on this booking and the fact that both men stepped up for it?
Massive respect for both guys for taking this fight on late notice, 5 rounds. Holy cow, because Burns just fought. This is his 3rd fight, like you mentioned, Mike. I mean, I'm sure he's doing it because he's using the leverage, right? That's what they talk about. When you have a chance to use the leverage and make some more money, hopefully, man, this guy's banking some zeros, grabbing a few extra bags out of all this, and at the same time, shortcutting his way to the title. He took a big loss against Chimaev about a year ago. That hurt. But look what he's done. He's dusted himself off, and look at the position he's in. As for Belal Muhammad, holy cow, this should have been his shot anyway. We've already talked about that one ad nauseum, so I'll leave that alone. But yeah, coming off the observance of Ramadan and, your body, what you put it through, for those that don't know, you can't eat or drink while the sun is up. So you have to really fast in different ways. And then it takes your body a while to come off it. So for him to do it, I mean, I have so much respect for Belal Muhammad for doing it. And the fact that the UFC even floats it as the winner gets the winner of, come on, man. That's ridiculous. Belal Muhammad should already be the guy facing Edwards, for crying out loud. But the way they phrase it, like they're doing them a favor. Just write zeros, all right? Write zeros. These guys are gangsters. These guys are going out there and saving the show. It fell apart, and that's your guys' fault because you needed one more fight. Heck, I think UFC 288 could have used one more fight. Get Homeboy and his secret juice, Costa and Volhovich, to still do that fight. Let's really stack these things, man. $85? Are you kidding me? They needed to do it. Write the zeros, but the focus should be the respect on both guys for doing it. And it just sucks that one of them has to wait until that fight happens in the fall. This waiting game's killing me.
Danny, your thoughts? Were you surprised to see this? Especially, I know you had interviewed Gilbert Burns like a couple days before this all happened, and he was laying out his thoughts and all that stuff. Were you caught off guard a little bit that he actually agreed to do this, and it's really happening in less than 2 weeks?
100%, because he literally told me in that interview, I'm doing like whatever happens next. I don't necessarily have to be the next in title, but my next fight will be for the belt. And not only that, but he's got a receipt. He's got literally Dana White on video saying, yeah, Gilbert's next fight is going to be a title fight, and he's going to be the backup opponent for Leon versus Colby Covington. I mean, dude, he pretty much just had to cross his arms and sit back and relax. Plus, he fought twice already this year. It's not like there's a lot to criticize about him. Yet he's taking this fight on short notice against a very, very dangerous Belal Muhammad. I'm absolutely surprised that that this fight's happening. But at the same time, Gilbert Durinho Burns is a BMF, dude. That guy is literally anytime, anywhere against anybody. And clearly, this is an example of that. So I really love this fight. This fight, as far as the action's concerned, is phenomenal. Everything about it. And props to Belal Muhammad as well. Just finished Ramadan, and he's already game to fight. So I love it. I'm all for this fight. The only thing that does bother me is that, think about this. If Durinho Burns, he would have 3 victories over very solid guys in 2023. Colby Covington hasn't even fought in way over a year, and he's still going to get the next shot over Gilbert Burns. Or heck, even if Belal Muhammad wins, Belal Muhammad, I think, would be on like 11 fights unbeaten or something like that. And even then, Covington would be a spot over him. That's the only thing that kind of bums me out about this matchup. This should be a title eliminator bout.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, we've been talking about this for weeks, right? And I guess let's just get right into it. We'll come to you with this question. I mean, we know, right? Like, anyone who's following the sport close enough understands that both these guys would deserve the title shot clearly over Colby Covington. We've talked about this ad nauseum at this point. But given what's happened, Jorge Masvidal losing his fight, the UFC booking this, if you're Leon Edwards now, do you almost prefer Colby Covington and being like, hey, like, I just fought a somewhat similar style. He's going to be the biggest selling pay-per-view for you at this point as the champion who gets the points. Are you looking at this booking and be like, hey, this is a good one to show who deserves it, but like maybe Colby Covington is my best option now?
I would like the fact that it's a long layoff. Those things would maybe be in your favor, but I honestly think if you look at the rankings, if you look at the records, yeah, maybe it's not there for Colby, but I still do feel like he's the best guy after the champion right now. And that is a tough matchup. So I'd probably disagree, but it's very, very close because as the other guy said, even JD here in the chat, Gilbert, that dude's the BMF. And if you look at Belal, he just finds a way to win. So, I mean, these are 2 really, really tough competitors. But when Colby Covington is at the top of his game, he's going to apply a lot of pressure. And that's kind of where we've seen Kamaru Usman have success against Leon Edwards. It's been doing that. And that's all Colby Covington does. And he's got the gas tank to do it. So to me, I think that still is the tougher matchup.
Yeah, I tend to agree. It's just going to be interesting to see how this all unfolds, right? Because I think in both the case of Burns and Belal Muhammad, you could make a case if you want to give them a title shot right now, sure. But like this win over each other, whoever gets it is what undeniably pushes their resume over the top, no matter who it is. And again, if the UFC is promising them, you fight the winner of this, and it's just a question of when does that fight happen? Because Leon Edwards is saying that he might not want to fight till October at this point. The UFC is making its London event in July a fight night, which means Leon Edwards won't be headlining it because it's not a pay-per-view. So it comes down to the waiting game. And I guess if you're Gilbert Burns, having fought 3 times, you're probably cool with it, even if it means sitting out for a year. If you're Belal, you're used to time off as well. So I don't know, tricky situation all around. But I think once we get the title fight on the books, we'll have a clear idea of what this all means going forward. But I want to move on to topic 4 now, guys. And we stick with kind of the fight announcement theme here. Among them was a huge fight announced for UFC 290 International Fight Week, July 8th in Las Vegas, the 11th annual International Fight Week. And Dana White dubbed it a, quote, middleweight title eliminator between Robert Whittaker and Dricus du Plessis. It's increasingly rare these days, guys, in 2023 that Dana White will say this is a number 1 contender fight, is a title eliminator. It was on the announcement graphic, all those things. But he said the winner of this fight will be taking on champion Israel Adesanya later this year, possibly in Sydney, Australia. There was some heat between Izzy and Duplessis in recent weeks. We know all the stuff that, came out with the, African history and all that kind of stuff. It seemed like there was an angle for a fight here. And I know there was some talk of potentially having these two fight in the summer when Izzy came out and said he wanted to do a quick turnaround. Seems like the UFC opted to go in a different direction, making this fight, but there's a risk involved, right? Like if Dricus loses this, that fight goes away, and you look at the Whittaker 3 fight, which, I mean, people will have their own opinions on how badly they want to see that. But I guess, Danny, let's start with you. Given everything I just said there with the middleweight division, was this the right fight to make, Whittaker versus Duplessis?
It's not a terrible option. I think it's actually quite good, but in my opinion, Robert Whittaker should be a heavy favorite here, and I expect him to win. I mean, all the respect to Duplessis, who is undefeated in the UFC, clearly a talented fighter, but skills-wise, I just see more in Robert Whittaker. That's just my personal opinion. And there's a lot of bad blood between Israel Adesanya and Duplessis. I think you could have made that fight given the bad blood, and also, I mean, Duplessis 5-0 in the UFC, so there wouldn't have been a lot to kind of harp on in terms of like, oh, he didn't deserve it. This is a BS title fight or whatever. I think you could have easily made that fight. The fan base wouldn't have complained, and you could have had a nice buildup of rivalry. I know the subject is a little bit touchy, obviously, because these two are kind of touching on race. That's what it is, and they keep going back and forth on that. But certainly you can't deny that it would have been a big fight and an easy one to sell. I mean, bad blood sells. And again, I agree with you, Mike. I don't know how much appetite, even though skill-wise, probably Robert Whittaker gets closer to beating Adesanya than Duplessis does. But, again, it would be a third meeting, 0-2. I kind of wish they would have just given the title shot to Duplessis and made that fight in the summer, have Robert Whittaker fight somebody else like Khamzat Chimaev or something. But even then, I don't hate this option. This is not a bad.
Goes, what do you think? Do you think the UFC made the right call here, or do you agree with Danny that they should have just shoehorned Duplessis into the title fight because he is one of the few ranked fighters, I think, outside of Sean Strickland in that top 8 or so who has not fought Adesanya, and if he loses this fight, you're just looking at yet another Izzy rematch.
Yeah, man, I hate this matchup. I really do, guys. Like, listen, when you have a guy like Israel Adesanya, who's so good, you can't just present somebody in front of them that has equal or greater skill set that we're trying to promote. You need something else, all right? Because Izzy's that good. You need a little bit of heat. And this guy's giving you heat. It's so easy to promote this fight. And if you look at his record, you can make it happen. It kind of makes sense, right? The problem is if you put him up against a guy like Robert Whittaker, as Danny said, Robert Whittaker is a tough guy, and he'd probably be the king of this division if it wasn't for Israel Adesanya, right? So for me, I feel like he's going to be a favorite. I feel like he probably will go through Duplessis, and I don't know that Duplessis makes it back to Israel Adesanya at that point, because if you look at the run that he's been through now, it's impressive, but he's kind of missed out on some of them big dogs in the middleweight division. I don't know if he'll be able to do that on a second run to get back to Israel Adesanya. So I think the UFC could have always revisited that Robert Whittaker fight. Why kind of put that label on it now? It doesn't make too much sense to me.
Yeah, and Robert says in the comments here, if nobody believes in Rob to win against Adesanya, why do they want Dricus to fight him? Assuming he's talking about Izzy. I get that, but like Izzy needs to fight someone, right? You can't just fight Robert Whittaker every single weekend because we think he's the best two people. UFC has events to put on and fights to promote, and Adesanya wants to build his resume against different challenges and styles and characters. Like, this is literally the sport we are describing here. If we just put the two best guys in there every single weekend, we would just have a million rematches, and that's just not the way it works. George, kind of close us out with your thoughts on the booking here. Do you think this was the right path, or do you echo this, that there's some flaws in logic here, perhaps?
Tons of flaws. We should learn from what just happened with Marino and Davis and Figueiredo. These guys thought there was an NBA Finals or something, going best out of 7 or whatever the hell they did. Guys, he's 2-0 against Whittaker. In that matchmaker meeting, ask yourselves that question. Do we like a guy to face a champion for the third time? No, they've never historically liked that. Okay, check mark. Hey, do we like championship fights that have heat? Yeah, we love those. Holy cow, these two have heat. Do we like a guy that's ready to fight and has publicly said he's ready to fight because we have shows to put on? Yes, we do. Well, Izzy's ready to go. DDP's ready to go. What the hell are you guys waiting for? That was the matchup. Whittaker had to wait 3 times. He had to win 3 fights before he got the second fight. So I don't think he minds waiting. He's playing video games down in Australia. He's chilled. He's got some money. He's a G. He knows he's the number 2 guy. All respect to him. I also think he's going to beat DDP, by the way. But I'm sorry, that's just a matchup that can wait. We have a fresh matchup. I'm tired of the rematches. And again, it just ticks so many boxes. Yet another letdown. Dana White was saying the other day, man, we should be going to Mexico. Yeah, you blew it. You should be doing these 2 Africans as well. Yeah, you're going to blow it if you don't put in the Russian against Jones, because that's going to mess up as well. So get it together.
Strong words from George, but I understand where he's coming from. We'll see what happens. I mean, we know Izzy likes to be active. No mind really. You couldn't have had him fight Plessis in July, August. Have Whittaker fight Paulo Costa or something in the meantime. And then if you want to do that Australia fight with Whittaker and Izzy again later in the year, boom, you still have it right there for you. I think it would have worked out. But again, I'm not in that matchmaking room. I don't know the finer details. But again, it does seem like a very high-risk thing. If Dricus wins, oh my God, like that fight's huge. But I think Robert Whittaker opened is like close to a minus 400 favorite for this fight. And I don't think a lot of people are complaining about that betting line. But anyways,
Mike,
fellas.
Mike, let me say this real fast. Maybe I do sound bitter, but I'm telling you, the UFC is this juggernaut that's just been revealed to be worth $13 billion. They have Endeavor behind them. They can do these things, all right? And for him to even say the other day, looks like we're never going to Hawaii, and Bellator goes back to back, and they have a proper arena that seats 15,000. Get away from the stadium show in the rain or whatever's scaring you away. I don't know, but start to make these things happen. I'm a passionate fan. I've seen fights in Hawaii. Those people deserve it. They've had stars to do it with too. Holloway, Penn, you know what I mean? I mean, this is ridiculous, some of the things they're missing out on.
Yeah, I mean, the Hawaii thing is a whole other can of worms. I know the UFC wants a pretty big site for you to go there, and I think Bellator is probably okay getting like some leftover pokey from the local stand or something to come there as their feast. So anyways, we'll move on to that. We can talk about, the Hawaii stuff later. We need to get to topic 5, which is, I guess, a pretty big piece of news from this past week involving Nate Diaz, guys, one of the biggest stars in the sport. It is not just his fight announcement with Jake Paul. Nate found himself in the headlines on Friday night for a multitude of reasons. And first, at the Misfit boxing event in New Orleans, where he was cornering teammate Chris Avila, or attending to support teammate Chris Avila. He was caught on camera ringside throwing a water bottle at reality star Chase Damore, and that started a bit of a scuffle. People got in the middle. A chair seemingly was attempted to be thrown, but from all appearances in that clip, things seemed to fizzle, or cooler heads prevailed in the moment. But then a few hours later, footage surfaced of Diaz on the streets of New Orleans in what appeared to be a multi-person altercation. You can see the outcome there. Numerous people were apparently either YouTubers or influencers of some kind. Just a pretty crazy scene there. And Diaz choked one of them out cold. The guy, went back in a pretty grisly fashion, slammed his head on the concrete. And there's still a lot of unknowns about exactly what happened here, especially what really prompted it all, especially the outside altercation. And we haven't heard from Diaz. Did he feel like he acted in self-defense? All these different elements that go into a situation like this. But we do know is what we saw on video, and that's Diaz, who is a superstar of the fight game, professional fighter, choking out someone who is not a professional fighter, at least in the same vein as he is. And that's a pretty dangerous situation that can come with all sorts of potential repercussions here. So I guess let's go to you first. What did you think of this video involving Diaz, or the multiple videos? And what was your takeaway from what you saw, everything involving him on Friday night?
Man, so we talk about some of the advantages of leaving the UFC, and one of them is sponsorships. How is Aquafina or Arrowhead not supported the Diaz brothers with all the water bottles these guys are chucking, dude? Give these guys a sponsorship. But I don't know what really led to this situation, but what I do know is I watch the news a lot, and this world is a very dangerous place, man. And not everybody plays by the rules. So, I don't know how many of these incidents he can have, that are going to go his way. Luckily, he is a trained fighter, and he can defend himself if that's what it is he's doing in this situation. But I think he has to realize that he's got a good chunk of money in the bank now. He has things to protect, and some of these situations can sometimes lead to lawsuits and other things, right? And even more dangerous. Like, you just never know when somebody's going to pull out a gun or something, or other innocent people are going to get hurt. And that's where this thing starts to get really dangerous, man. And God forbid somebody does that one day and this headline just changes, to something more grim. I don't want to see Nate Diaz go through that. So I think at this point, like if every time you go out, you're having these issues, either stop going to these events or get bodyguards like Floyd Mayweather or something. But you can only have so many of these, man, before it ends really ugly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he does have bodyguards. It's his entire crew, but no one's really interested there just to protect him. They're also get caught up in the craziness of these types of moments and stuff. And then we get what we saw. I mean, George, is this a bad look for Nate that we saw here? Do you think he needs to do better to remove himself from a situation like this, or watching the footage and kind of seeing what happened here? I mean, I've seen some people maybe dig into this on Twitter and stuff a little further than I've had the chance to. And it seems like this guy who is a Logan Paul lookalike of some sort, that seems how he needs to like make his bones right now. I know it seems like he's trying to enter this, Misfits boxing, YouTube boxing kind of world here. So maybe he's trying to get a moment out of Nate that can start something down the line. I don't know. What did you see from all this?
Hey, you know what, man? On the streets, there are no rules sometimes when it comes to this, especially late night involving drinking and involving the fight scene, right? It sucks, but that's the way it is. I think Nate Diaz is in the right, honestly. If anything, they say the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the gentle art. A quick choke, you put the guy down, it's over. He doesn't wake up with a black eye. He doesn't want to retaliate. He doesn't have to answer about the busted lip. I mean, granted, he did go down a little harder after I watched it a few times. It looked like the first time he choked him, put him down, and walked away. Then when I watched it, okay, yeah, I guess the head was released and did bounce. Again, you're on the streets. What's Nate Diaz supposed to think? There's a skirmish that happened inside the arena. Now he's outside, and there's a skirmish happening around him. Nobody sees a celebrity or an athlete that they want to get an autograph for him or a picture and says, I'll wait till a fight breaks out and then approach him. No, you wait until there's some sort of calm or something. There's a situation where that might not happen, right? So to me, it looked like he could be up to no good as well. In fact, on post-fight, if you want to call it that, he's already saying he's going to knock out Nate Diaz. So I don't know that this guy was some sort of a choir boy that was approaching him. Nate doesn't know. And again, everything that's happening around, I think he did the right thing. You kind of entered his space. He just diffused it. It wasn't John Jones against Lyoto Machida. He didn't drop him like a sack of potatoes. He just went to lay him down. Look, it's the streets, man. Stuff's happening. You can't just take him down and lower him, right? You might get punted in the face while that happens. So I don't know what to say. I don't fault Nate at all. Might he have to settle something small, perhaps, if the guy goes the route of the whole suing or who knows what. But I think they should just leave it alone. You were just caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, partner. And as far as Cesar Gracie fighters, what's with you guys in the water bottles, man? I don't know what's worse, that or the comments that I see sometimes from Robert and Charles Barkley in the chat. Horrible, horrible, horrible.
I mean, it's a tricky one, right? Like, I do disagree a little bit, George. Like that, the drop to the ground was pretty nasty, and I think he did post a video with like a gash on the back of his head. There was some blood and stuff. Like that's just where it gets scary. Street fighting, right? Because you never know. You can be in a fair fight and hit someone and maybe, that kind of thing. But when it's not the hit that you have them, it's the hit when they hit the ground. Just someone hit their head in the wrong place.
But he didn't
die, things like that.
He didn't swing. He didn't follow up. He didn't soccer kick him.
No, I agree with that. He did, like I think, the right thing in that situation, choking the guy rather than getting in a fight, especially when he has a boxing match coming up. You don't want to break a hand or something like that. But I don't know, Danny, you tell me, like, is this a bad look for Nate? Is there anything he could have done to defuse the situation? And again, I think the bigger thing that we wonder about is what kind of potential legal repercussions come with this, criminal, maybe even if they want to go that route. Like these, I think, are the more lingering questions. I don't think anyone's surprised that Diaz was in a situation like this. It's more so what happens now.
Yeah, I have to disagree here with George. I think if this would have been Conor McGregor, I think everybody would have been calling him unhinged and all this and a horrible person and this and that, or insert really any fighter, any UFC fighter in this situation. But because it's Nate Diaz and he's beloved by a lot of people, myself included, a huge fan of the Diaz brothers, I think we sometimes give them a little bit too much slack and we go, oh, it's gangster 209, it's part of the persona. But in reality, dude, you shouldn't be getting into street fights. And it's not like this is the first. If George St. Pierre would have done that, then you go, okay, you start asking, what did that guy do, right? Because George St. Pierre rarely, never, at least from what I've seen, ever gets into a street fight. But Nate Diaz, he's often in these headlines, and often we're, celebrating it rather than, condemning it, which we should be. This is literally assault. This is illegal behavior that can get you sued or get you incarcerated because of it. That choke was pretty nasty. He was kneeing him to the body while he had him in the choke, and then he just dropped him on concrete and had a nasty gash on the back of his head. Look, not so long ago, I think a couple of years ago here in Miami, a Mexican actor, very well known, got into a little road rage incident with another man. They got off. He literally just struck him once. Just seemed like something normal. The guy fell, cracked his head, and you can look this up. It's on the news. He was sentenced for manslaughter. So and he's in jail. So, I mean, you never know what can happen in a street fight. Not only the legal repercussions, the look, but also, dude, you could be messing with somebody's life. They might not die, or they might just be somebody else after that. I mean, you never know. Again, it's hard for me to commentate 100% because the other guy, as George mentioned, is not necessarily look like some regular folk. He kind of lingers in that YouTube area, as you mentioned, Mike. And, sometimes we know that these people do things for clout, right? They would rather get knocked out just so they can be in a video and say, Nate Diaz knocked me out and this and that. So again, I don't know what the guy did to instigate it, if he did anything at all, but all I'm saying is it's not a good look. There is a pattern. He's constantly getting into these scuffles. He doesn't have bodyguards. It seems he has enablers, and you just got to call it how it is, man. Nate Diaz he's a millionaire. He's got a wife. He's got kids, super successful. Dude, he's got a lot to lose. Walk away. You shouldn't be putting yourself in a position like this, or you could, end up in jail or worse. Who knows? As you mentioned,
Right, well,
in Florida here, everybody's got guns and stuff. That's why I always tell people avoid street fights at all costs.
This is true, but he's already there in that situation. They stumbled out of whatever they're doing. We don't even know if they're going home peacefully. And like you said, a cheerleader got shot because she opened the wrong car door. I'm sure all of us have done that. Some lady pulled into a wrong driveway. She got shot, I believe. There's a lot of some black kid was trying to get his brother knocked on the wrong door. He got shot.
But my point is, Nate Diaz always finds himself in these situations, man.
Where he could have stabbed him.
There's a pattern here.
I mean, so at some point, once there's that point where, hey, what are you doing? You're getting close. And remember, there's a fight going on. This wasn't just one-on-one where we could go, well, maybe he's just going to ask him for a picture or an autograph or something like that. Stuff went on earlier in the night, and stuff's going on around him. That guy's just reacting. And I thought, if anything, he probably did him a favor by just choking him and putting him down. Yes, the psychics of it all, the gravity of it all, he fell, he hit his head. He'll be okay. As far as a lawsuit, you got to prove that you take some damage. So unless he can prove, oh yeah, I got concussion or whatever, I think Nate's going to be fine. He's going to get away just fine, honestly. And
well, I'm sure he's going to be fine. That guy looked like he would rather take the clout and have a response video and get himself some clicks on some sites than get himself compensated because he felt he was done wrong. But what I'm saying is, Nate, this is not Nate Diaz's first time. I mean, just before that, he was trying to start a scuffle throwing a water bottle, and we kind of just laugh it off and stuff. And yeah, it does make for funny videos. I'm not gonna say I haven't been entertained by some of these videos, but dude, you're almost 40 and you're constantly getting into street fights, and you're gambling not only with your life, because some people may have a gun or a knife, or you're also gambling with other people's lives. Dude, he's got too much to lose. All I'm saying is this shouldn't be happening, and it seems that Nate Diaz constantly finds himself in it. And a lot of us, and I include myself in it as well, we kind of give him excuse him and give him some slack, where if it would have been Conor McGregor, we would have destroyed him and being like, oh, he's unhinged and this and that, and gone off him. Sorry, but Nate Diaz is also in the wrong here, man. And there's a pattern too. It's a bit worrisome. Hopefully it doesn't happen, but he could find himself in some trouble, man.
We need to address we need to address who's really wrong here, and it's New Orleans. This crap happens over and over in New Orleans. Michael Bisping got popped in the face in New Orleans, right? Yeah. And yeah, the guy's got a gash on his head. Maybe he does have brain damage, but look at Colby Covington. He had brain damage. He's going to have a title shot. So I think everybody's going to win when this is all over, guys.
Yeah, we'll see. I think Danny hit on a good point there, though, that if this was many other characters in our space besides Nathaniel Diaz, this would be a very different conversation with a very different tone we would be speaking of right now. This is almost like an expectation of Diaz and goes along with his brand and all that stuff. But if anyone has to pay the repercussions, it is going to be him. If someone decides to go to court, anything like that, he's the one that's going to have to pay for this because it was caught on camera. It does look bad, and unless there's different footage or a perfectly logical explanation with all these things, that's just the way it's probably going to end up going. But we will see what happens. Obviously, still haven't heard from Nate, haven't heard a ton of other details, police reports. If there is any of that stuff out of there, I'm sure we will have follow-ups on it on MMAJunkie.com in the coming days, weeks, whatever it may take. But we are pretty much right up against the clock here, guys. So we are going to skip the additional topics for this week because we went right up against it. But I thought this was a great episode. We covered a lot. It was a super, super busy past week from the sport, and it's going to be another busy one coming up. Only one really major event coming up this weekend with UFC Fight Night 223, I believe it is. A kind of makeshift main event there between Song Yadong and Ricky Simone. Yes, and of course, BKFC. We got Mike Perry and Luke Rockhold and Chad Mendez and Eddie Alvarez. Their biggest show to date. We will have coverage of it all throughout the weekend, and we'll be back here again next week on Spinning Back Clique to talk about it all. Thank you for watching, everyone.